Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 22. Hey everybody, thanks for listening in again to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 22. Today we have with us on the line, of course, my esteemed co-host Todd Pringnitz and Mr. Bronson Strickland. Bronson is the co-director of MSU's, Mississippi State University's Deer Lab. I had Bronson on the show some time ago, and Todd did not get to talk to him. So today we get to listen to Todd, myself, and Bronson talk everything that is the whitetails world. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our talk with Mr. Bronson Strickland. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the White Knuckle Podcast. Today with me, of course, is Todd Pringnitz on Skype on the other line. And on the other line, we have Mr. Bronson Strickland from MSU's Deer Lab. How are you guys today?
I'm doing fantastic, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely, man. This is Todd, and I'm very, very excited to talk with you. Now, Bronson, you're from Mississippi State University?
That's right. I'm a professor and co-director of the Mississippi State University Deer Lab.
Fantastic, man. Well, we just were kind of quick chatting here before, and I told Bronson I always enjoy talking with biologists because I'm really analytical about whitetails, but I don't have the biology background, so it's always kind of interesting. I've developed theories of my own, and you can talk to so many hunters at trade shows and on podcasts, but until you get sometimes biologists on the phone, it's difficult to really know if there's a lot of truth behind certain things, because especially with the way Facebook is and everything, you can put up a question and get 450 different answers on the same topic, and that kind of seems to be inherent in hunting to a certain degree. But one of the things that I'm really curious to know your thoughts on, and I'm going to kind of put my topics in an order from, I guess, season-wise, from what has happened the most recent, and then as we go forward more in the summertime. But one of the things that I've been trying to figure out for many years now is in regard to deer antler shedding. And I've kind of developed a theory over the years in watching some of these big mature deer where it seems like these 5, 6, 7-year-old deer, a lot of times the dominant deer in the area, when it comes time for shed season, I will have them patterned and think, holy moly, I'm going to be right in it and I'm going to find their sheds and all this. And it seems like just about the time they shed, all of a sudden they just vanish. And I mean, off of trail cameras and everything. And I don't know, the way I look at it is I can imagine if you've just monitored deer on a corn pile, you watch how an antler animal will basically fend off anything off the pile if it's got antlers. They've got weapons, so to speak. And I don't know if it's a dominance thing or it's I guess my question for you is, and this is my theory, is basically I believe that a whitetail can kind of sense that it's about to shed. And I think it does something psychologically to them where it makes them feel vulnerable maybe. I don't know what biologically goes on with whitetails that would make a buck like that just all of a sudden change his home range and just disappear when he sheds his antlers. And a lot of them, I just can't find the antlers. And I mean, I know where these deer are. I know where their core areas are. I know where they're feeding. And they just straight vanish. Do you have any insight into that?
Before you answer that, Bronson, I just wanted to add to the list of your many titles is now deer psychologist.
I'm Dr. Fraser Crane. I'm listening. Yeah. Todd, that is a good question, and I hope I can do it justice. Now, I will say from the get-go here, I've never conducted any research, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any research that has specifically looked at, let's call it a few weeks before shedding and a few weeks after shedding, and where that buck was spending time, where was his core area before and after. But I do have a little bit of biological insight that might lead us down the right road here. So you got to think about what causes shedding. And so on the annual cycle of a buck, just like the seasons with the summer, fall, winter, spring, you got to think about the annual hormone cycle that's going on as well. And for a buck, there's a tremendous amount of fluctuations of all sorts of different hormones in their endocrine system, but most conspicuously for a buck is, of course, testosterone. And so testosterone regulates the antler cycle. So when testosterone is severely diminished or absent for the most part, that's when they grow antlers. When testosterone comes back into their body, so now we're thinking, in the fall, that is when they harden their antlers and hold on to the antlers. And then the specific time of year you're referring to, when they're shedding their antlers, that is when testosterone is once again on the decline. So, it all depends geographically on where you're at and exactly when this occurs. But let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's say end of winter, beginning of spring. Testosterone is going to decline rapidly and a pronounced amount of decline. And that is when the antlers are going to loosen up and fall off. So that is like the end, that is officially the end of their breeding season. They've lost the capacity to breed for the most part. They no longer have testosterone in their system, meaning they're no longer able to breed, at least with any frequency. And now their weapon, Todd, as you so correctly called it, that indeed is their weapon, is gone as well. So now they are in a different frame of mind, if you will. Let's get back to the psychology there. They're in a different frame of mind, and now they're shifting more into survival mode. And so now it's mainly all about food. Reproduction, fighting, dominance, all that stuff is really out of their brain right now, and they're just focusing on survival. So, sorry that was so long-winded, but to circle back to your question, I would suspect maybe at the time of shedding or right after shedding, they may be frequenting new areas because this marks a time on the annual calendar for them to go back to procuring food. Not too long after this, they're going to be developing the social groups, with bucks once again. They're going to be able to tolerate bucks in their presence. So I would approach that question, Todd, with, there's a hormonal shift that's occurring at that time, and they're probably changing their behavior because of that.
Okay. And that's what I've always kind of noticed is that my bucks really, it's just based on hormones, obviously. As soon as this testosterone starts coming in their system, just like you said, in the early fall, that's when they move in to around the major food sources because the does are, in those areas. And then the rest of the year, they seem to be off in no man's land. And I guess to tie into that question quickly, is it common for the dominant big bucks in an area to be loners? Or, I know it's an individual deer personality and all that, but it seems like most of the big bucks I've ever followed during velvet, they either hang around with one other individual buck. Usually it's it varies. Some of them hang around with a spike horn. Sometimes they hang around with deer of the same age, mature deer. But are there certain bucks that will not go into bachelor groups when they're in velvet?
I don't think so. I do not have any specific evidence for that. We certainly don't really see that, in our deer research pens. And it may be, and hey, we got to say this from the onset as well. Just like human beings, you would be surprised how individualistic deer are. And right when you come up with a rule for their behavior, there's always that 10% that you don't understand. They're always breaking the rules. So, what we see in our research facility is you will have some bucks that are just laid back. They can tolerate the presence of other bucks. Now, not in like the peak of the rut when they're in hard antler and so forth,
sure.
But and then some are just kind of apathetic, easy come, easy go. This other fella doesn't disturb me or harass me or bother me in any way. And then you've got some bucks that it almost seems like they strive for attention, whether it be humans or other deer. They're just always interacting with people, always interacting with other deer. So, Todd, it's really hard to assign a behavioral rule to that. It
Sure.
certainly wouldn't surprise me if there's some individuals that even during the spring and summer, they just really don't care to be a part of a bachelor group. But I think that would not be the average. I think most of them are going to tolerate the presence of other bucks and be in a bachelor group.
I agree with you, and just like what you were mentioning, that's the one thing I've learned. I think we all learn. The more you learn, the less you think you really do know. Just because you never know when it's going to be another fastball or a curveball, I guess you could say, and that's how these deer are. Just amazing to me. The more I know about my core area, the more I realize how much it can really change from season to season. But yet, along the way, there are so many consistencies that are the true year after year after year. But I think that's what intrigues me more than anything now is trying to find the similarities and the differences between bucks and between seasons. And you throw human pressure and hunting pressure into that, and different weather patterns. Some years, I mean, we've had droughts where they've been 5-6 weeks without rain here in the summer. You can imagine how that would change the patterns of a whitetail as well. The other side of it is, constant wet weather. Like the last few weeks, we've had so much rain here. It amazes me. It amazes me that they have to be out in that stuff year round, every day, every night. They're a pretty amazing animal.
No, they absolutely are, and luckily they have thousands of years kind of embedded and instinctually embedded within their genes that whether they know it or not, instinct kind of takes over, and they know how to handle those different changes in weather and so forth, changes in the environment, and for the most part, they know how to cope with it.
I just wanted to back up a second here and ask Bronson, if you remember, and you may not remember our last conversation, I talked about the differences between where Todd hunts, because I had just gotten back, I think, from walking his ground for the first time with him shed hunting. The differences in Todd's deer, we'll call them, and the difference in Jason's deer. And as we talk about these things and what deer on the average do, is it fair to say that geographically those things that happen on the average don't change in terms of how deer react to one thing or another just because of geography? I'm not talking about human pressure or anything like that, but does geography change the way that they act in any way?
I don't think so. I can't prove that, but I don't think there's any biological precedent for that. I think they're all going to interact with the environment in generally the same way. I think any geographical differences you would see are mainly going to be related to human beings and the disturbance and the pressure that hunters or non-hunters, just human beings, could cause. I think that's going to be the primary driver of any differences you'd see.
And one of the things I wanted to comment on too, Bronson hit the nail on the head when he talked about instinct. I think as humans, our brains are so big, we're so analytical, we have so many. I mean, we're brain-powered individuals. The instinct, we have a lot of these instincts, but we're not in touch with them because we have big brains. We have food on our table every day. We have a house over our head. We don't have to worry about the survival challenges that these animals are faced. But deer don't think. They don't reason. They are so instinctually keyed into their environments that it is just the way it is. And as soon as hunters, as soon as you get past the mindset of, thinking a buck's literally walking around tree stands, looking up and going, hey, that's a human in a tree stand, I'm going to, avoid all those tree stands. That's not how they're wired. But once you kind of figure out some of these instinctual drivers, so to speak, they are very patentable and they are very adaptable, just like humans are. But you just got to learn to think differently and not think like normal hunters. You got to think from a very straightforward instinctual line. And I don't know, do you have anything else to add, Bronson, in regard to the instinctual properties that these animals generally get as they get more and more mature?
Well, I would say they, the instinct for them that they're going to be normal pressures, normal stimuli that they're going to react to. So being chased by a dog is very similar to being chased by a wolf or chased by a coyote or something like that. So there are certainly going to be sounds and smells that I think are more or less, some are kind of embedded. I use that term a lot, but, instinctual, I say embedded within their genome. It's just kind of one of those instincts they inherit from mom and dad. And then there are things that they learn. They learn how to behave, from their mom. Mom will introduce them to different stimuli, and if mom runs, they learn to run. And then there's things they learn on their own through kind of, a feedback system, a negative feedback system or positive feedback system. Positive feedback system would be, I've never been exposed to this food before, but I gave it a try, and it tastes good. A few hours later, in terms of digestion, believe it or not, they can get positive feedbacks for that, or negative feedbacks, just like we get with the stomach ache, and they start associating, this food's good, and evidently it's nutritious. The same thing can be, Todd, as you mentioned, with, a hunter in a stand. Gosh, they smell something, they hear something, they see something, and whether an arrow was whizzed at them or a gunshot went over their head, but they know something is not right. And, those types of things, they just file away in their catalog, so to speak, and over the course of a lifetime of a buck or an adult doe for that matter, those things, again, accumulate, and they start building a greater and greater body of knowledge. I use knowledge loosely, but they start associating different stimuli with the way they should react. And that's why we see older deer typically, a lot more difficult to harvest than younger deer. I hope I hit the mark with that, Todd. That was my best shot anyway.
And just like what you were talking about with association, part of how I've kind of, at least mentally, filed or analyzed these deer and how they are going to react is kind of similar to dogs. If you look at how dogs are trained, it's through constant and continuous repetition to establish those associations so that, hey, you sit down, you're going to get a treat. Hey, you sit down, you're going to get a treat. After a week, they're going to sit down because they want a treat. It is that type of association, but they can't put two and two together. It's something that is a constant, like muscle memory. It's something they have to be encounter, throughout their entire life. And, a lot of it too is, specifically when it comes to whitetail hunting, it is amazing when you get into their comfort zone, into their core areas, how differently they act than when they're outside of that comfort zone. And I always compare it to, it's like taking candy from a baby. If you can slip into the bedding area or these core areas, these big bucks, it's like hunting a natural deer again. But sometimes those core areas are so small and so hard to get into, it's just very challenging and very difficult to actually get into that zone. If you were to guess what the average core area size is, and I always think of everything in a circle. If a buck has a bedding area on a knob, so to speak, and around here we kind of have smaller topography. So, maybe most of our knobs probably average about a half acre to an acre, and obviously everything's different. But what would you say, how big of an area do most mature deer spend a majority of their time in?
That's really, really tough, Todd, and I hate to always give the answer here. It gets really boring, and people roll their eyes when they hear it.
Sure.
But it depends on so many things. There's such a landscape context that would go with that. There's such a, we call a habitat quality context. Now, habitat quality in this example isn't related to food, but it might be related to cover or structure, where they can strategically bed, where they can hear, smell, see. So, Todd, it's tough, but it could certainly be a quarter of an acre to several acres, where I'm thinking would be a core area where they're going to bed. Now, then we get into a core area of where they're going to spend most of their time. That's kind of how biologists, we think about it. We define typically a core area when we're mapping out their movements, like when we're looking at, if we put a GPS collar on them, or in the old days we had a VHF radio transmitter on them. We call a core area where they spend 50% of their time and we call their home range within a season where they spend 95% of their time.
Okay.
So it's excluding when they take, a little trip for a day or two and come back. But those core areas, Todd, can range, those can be 20, 30, 50, 100 acres, and bigger than that. So it really varies buck by buck. A lot of it depends on age. A lot of it depends on their personality. And then it depends on where you're at. So I'm sorry I don't have just the best answer of it's going to be 5 acres. It could be more,
I was looking for
less.
I was looking for 158 feet by 27.
I would go with 128.
No, I guess I'm kind of fortunate because I've been able to hunt a lot of different variety of properties in several states, but particularly here in Iowa. And I've hunted some farms that have had almost zero human intrusion at all and had everything going for them where, your opportunity to see a mature deer on their feet during daylight was very high, and you could resort to hunting the typical pinch points and funnels and in the typical spots that any other hunter would hunt, field edges, corners of fields. And then as I've transitioned and learned more and more and started hunting behind my own property here, I've got a lot of hunting pressure around, not a crazy amount, but enough where these deer are hunted and they know it. And a lot of the hunters around me are average guys who are kind of more weekend warriors. So they're hunting in the typical spots most everybody would hunt. So they've educated these deer to a certain degree. And now I don't even plan on getting opportunities at those mature animals in those typical spots everybody else would hunt. And I've just put 2 and 2 together over the years that it's because they've been hunted in those spots over and over and over. So they avoid those common areas that any hunter, including myself, would go immediately and start there. So as you go, you learn, but just like what you said, every area is different, and then individual bucks and what encounters they've had and how the hunters around you are hunting. If they're good hunters who hunt the wind and hunt smart, or are they just going in and hunting when they have time, regardless of what the wind direction is, and really just doing a massive job of educating these mature deer. And around here, they just don't move much during daylight. Even during the rut, it's hard to catch one of those big dominant deer out of their little core area. And on my farm, it's pretty small. I would guess most of these bucks probably hang out in an area of a couple 100 yards in diameter most of the time. Now, of course, when a doe comes in the heat and it's the rut, anything can change at any time, but they really don't move much. They're pretty patient and reclusive animal in general. So it's always interesting to get different perspectives on that, though.
There's one great example, Todd, from this was research. Heck, this has been 15 or so years ago, and it was in Maryland, I believe. But yeah, it was a heavily hunted property, and they were also conducting a scientific study on that property as well. But they had one older buck, and that fella had learned how to navigate the hunting season. And gosh, this area, I think, may not have even been over an acre in size, but it was really, really thick. So think of, blackberry and briars and all that kind of stuff. The kind of place a hunter is not going to go, walking through. And that buck, every single day for the hunting season, from sunup until sundown, that's where he bedded. And so all that to say in support, Todd, of your perspective and your experience, is that, the older they live and the more they learn of these safe places they can go where they're not going to get harassed and not going to be, affected or moved by hunters. And coincidentally, this morning I was reviewing a paper. This one was out of Europe, and it was with roe deer and red deer. But and it wasn't even dealing with hunting. This was in a park, and the perspective of this was these park planners have to be really careful where they put recreational trails and where the really good feeding areas is what they called them. The feeding areas are where we would say, there's good forage resources or good habitat that's providing forage resources. They were finding that just human beings walking on these trails, so no guns, no bows, no killing of the deer at all, but that was enough to keep these roe deer and red deer out of going to these optimal areas to feed and to bed.
Wow.
And so I say that is that it doesn't even have to be a gunshot. It doesn't even have to be, two bucks are side by side and one gets shot and they learn, hey, I don't need to hang out here at this time of day. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's literally just seeing and smelling where humans have been, like in this park in Europe, where you may completely change, their patterns, where they go and where they bed.
Do you think, is it a predatory instinct where they feel like they're being... I guess compared to like a pack of coyotes, when they smell a coyote, it's got to send chills down their spine. I can only imagine. Or is it just they don't want to be around anything?
I think it's predatory. I think they're an herbivore, and for other large mammals, so for mammals that are half their size or larger, they are prey. Now, whether they really look at a human being, smell a human being, and think, hey, we are, an apex predator like a wolf, a bear, a lion, or something like that, I don't know. But certainly, and unless they are conditioned to humans, like they've been bottle fed or something, most of them behave like we've all seen before in the woods. They're not going to give us a second chance. They're going to run.
No, and I mean, just thinking about the predatory, I got to imagine it's not uncommon for a deer during its life cycle to have witnessed one of its friends or kids get killed and eaten by a coyote, and I can only imagine the noise that type of a instance would create. And I don't know what type of an association, if they really know, hey, I'm going to get bit by this coyote, it's going to hurt, he can eat me. But that's got to be pretty traumatic when it comes down to it. I would imagine. I can't even fathom it. But
and some of it, Todd, is give you two examples real quick. Most human beings have an innate fear of spiders and snakes. Even before you've ever had any experience with a snake, most people, are going to recoil or withdraw or be scared of snakes. So the same thing can be for spiders. If you're a teenager and you've never seen a spider before and a big spider's crawling on your arm, you're more than likely going to flinch. And that's kind of been shown time and time again that we can use our logic, we can rationalize, we can be educated and say, hey, that snake over there, that's a king snake, it's no big deal. But I'm sure both of you know people that can't get over that. It does not matter if you say that I'm holding the snake in my hand, you can see it is docile, it is not going to bother you. It is a phobia embedded with them, and they can't shake it. And so I don't know if that's directly a parallel with what goes on instinctually with a deer, but that's kind of the way I think of it. I think there are certain sounds, smells, and sights that on the average, they're just kind of programmed that over eons, my mom, my granddad, grandfather, et cetera, they ran from that sound. And so that type of behavior was inherited, and I lived because, they're not thinking that, but they lived because, their ancestor ran from this sound, and that's how a lot of those behaviors get perpetuated.
That's probably one of the coolest analogies I've ever heard, and it definitely is something that I've never thought of it in that perspective. And it reminded me of, I don't know if you guys have seen on Facebook, there's been a couple of videos of showing cats, and their owners will put a cucumber behind them, and the cat, as soon as it sees that, it will literally be 10 feet off the ground freaking out.
Why is that? What harm is a cucumber doing?
It's got to be the snake, right?
Yeah. There's something there, some picture that excites them and terrifies them.
But that just cracked me up. Like, it's not even a snake, but that shape and that color, it must just be inherent. Just like we said, it's driven instinctually into them, where they see something that's dark and long, and they better be ready to run because they're going to die. Or at least that's the way they react anyway, and it's quite comical. But that's a very interesting...
I thought when you said Facebook and cats, I thought you were going to talk about the cats with lightsabers. I've seen that about Facebook.
Now we're talking into a different galaxy here. Oh, too funny.
I've got a question, if I can, real quick. When it comes to mature deer or hunting a mature deer, through your research, is there a specific thing that you'd put at the top of the list that disrupts them the most?
Any disturbance. Any disturbance. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a hunting context, but the older those bucks get, the more accumulated experiences they have with humans, and all the evidence I have seen, and some of this may be anecdotal, but a lot of it can be proven recently with GPS transmitters, is that whether they see you or whether they sense you are there or whether they sense you have been there, as in smelling your trail, smelling where you've been, it can affect their behavior for days. There was some very compelling research conducted a few years ago, both at Mississippi State and at Auburn University, where you would see anywhere from a 3 to 4 to 5 day lag time, where that one single interaction that a buck had with sensing a human being, in this case a hunter, was there, even though the buck wasn't shot at or scared by the hunter in any way, but just them sticking their nose in the air and going, something's not right. It literally affected their movement patterns for the next 4 to 5 days. Some research we conducted at Mississippi State was, once the hunting season begins, so this was a designed study where we manipulated the density of hunters that went into a particular area, and then we had a place that wasn't hunted. And literally after 3 days, 2 to 3 days of hunters being in the woods, then they changed their behavior. They went from their normal patterns, their normal time of day, the routes they took, how often they were traveling, and they completely changed. So, Jason, good question. I wish I could narrow it or partition it down to this particular thing or that particular thing, but bottom line is just them sensing your presence in the woods.
Intrusion, in other words.
Yeah, good word, intrusion.
I personally, I think scent is the number one thing, at least with mature bucks that I've ever seen, and I'll even take it a step further. Ground scent in areas that they're not used to smelling humans is such a killer, as well as just your scent when you're hunting. If they get downwind and they smell human, boy, it's just a reaction that is unlike any other. And I think it's just because they trust their nose above and beyond anything else. If you dupe a buck and he comes in, and Rusty Nail, I use him as an example all the time because we had him in his core area, but we had the wind on him, and he ended up busting us visually. And when he took off, he snorted. I never thought I would see him again, not in that area. I ended up killing him in the same spot 4 days later, coming in from a different direction, but he was right back in there. And I think part of the reason why is because he couldn't put 2 and 2 together 100%. He saw something move, he knew it wasn't right, and he blew out of there. A month earlier, I actually have pictures, trail camera pictures, of him checking the ground scent of me walking on this main trail. And he literally disappeared, and he ended up moving about a mile. And I felt like at that point he knew this is not normal and this is not good, and it freaked him out. It freaked him a mile away, literally. So I personally, just from my experiences, and ground scent and human scent in the wrong areas, in their sensitive areas, I think do the most damage. And I've heard that from most of the guys who taught me a lot anyway over the years. It's, man, everything revolves around their nose when it comes to that.
That's pretty compelling evidence, Todd. I agree with you. I think that's a great story and a great example.
I think that's just because that's their most powerful weapon. Our brain is our most powerful weapon. Jason, your hair is definitely your most powerful weapon.
Right.
What's the story with that?
Oh boy.
Oh my goodness, Bronson. We don't need it. Todd likes to give me a hard time because, I don't know, like a year ago or maybe it was 2 years ago that I had spiked hair that was frosted and had frosty tips.
Very sexy, I'm telling you.
And They love to give me a hard time about it. I just since then I've quit doing it, so they have to eventually let it die, but it's not going to die anytime soon.
I'm almost bald, so I definitely have hair envy from that standpoint, and it's pretty much why I wear a baseball cap most of the time, because I don't want to blind the world with my awesome dome reflection.
Yeah, well, Jason, I don't have that weapon either. So I'm having a little bit of hair envy right now. I wish I could do that, Jason, but
well, it's certainly not helping me kill any more deer. Todd, you had mentioned when we talked prior to getting Bronson on the line that you had a question about fawns, and I know a lot is said about fawn recruitment and all that kind of stuff, and I don't know that I 100% understand all that, but what question did you have with respect to fawns?
Well, one of the theories, I guess, that my group of hunter friends or whatever we've talked about in the past is, some bucks are small, some bucks are big, either whether it be body size, antler size, or whatever. I can imagine if a doe gets bred, right out of the gate, let's say October 28th, October 31st, early in the rut. She gets bred, she gets pregnant. That fawn's going to be born as early in the spring as it basically can be. Now, what about the doe that gets bred, it doesn't take, and she comes back in a heat, let's say, and you'd be better on the dates, but let's say December. I don't know how late they can come back into heat. But let's say that doe gets pregnant late in the rut, and there's a difference of maybe 2 months of gestation. Now, that fawn's going to be born later in the spring, so it won't have as much time to beef up in it. Will that animal always be behind in the genetic race, or will they recover after a year and it won't make a difference?
Excellent question. Okay, a couple of things there. Todd, it's 28 days, or you just think of a month. So very similar to human beings. So if they are not bred in their first cycle, about 28 days later, they're going to come into estrus again, and they will keep cycling. Research has shown up to 5 or 6 times until they get bred. Yeah, now in the wild, that rarely happens. That had to be within a pen where bucks, weren't allowed in there with her. But physiologically, that's how many times she can cycle. So about a month later, let's just say. Okay, so yes, you're exactly right. So that particular fawn, let's just say buck fawns, it's going to hit the ground 1 month later. It's going to be a month behind. And so on the average, and this happens a bunch in the southeast because we have such varied rut dates in the south, and because we have such varied rut dates, which can go from, in some places, the end of October all the way to the beginning of February. That's just all within the southeast. You see dramatically different times in which fawns hit the ground, fawns are born. That has a huge impact for that population of what you can expect the yearling average antler size to be. So yeah, it's going to be a smaller fawn. It's also going to be a smaller yearling. And so in Mississippi, when we correlate areas relative to breeding dates and hence fawning dates, you might see variation of from 40% all the way to 90% of the yearling bucks are going to be spikes simply because they were born late, bred late, and born late. Now, back to your second part of that question, will they catch up? They absolutely can, but it depends on, do they have adequate food resources? So if your density's okay, deer density's okay, and the ratio of food to deer is okay, yes, more than likely those bucks will catch up by 2, 3, and certainly by 4 years of age. A lot of those late-born buck fawns will be indistinguishable from the early-born buck fawns.
Okay. And that is, it just keeps going back to basically genetics, which is what at least I've found to be, the most significant factor, that generally, a buck's either going to be big his whole life or he's going to be small or he's going to be average. There's usually not a huge correlation with, spikes, I guess you could say, here and there, or spikes in the statistical data, I guess is what.
Yeah, the environment will impact that. I mean, there's so many different things. The mom's experience. Did I have a sibling or not? Born in a good area, born in a bad area, born in a good year, born in a bad year, born early, born late. It goes on and on and on.
Okay.
But yeah, so they have a genetic program of what they are going to look like, and the environment affects the expression of that program. So are they going to fulfill their genetics or not? But a lot of that washes out over time. So there may be an acute effect of the environment within a year or even a year after, but usually a couple years down the road, it'll wash away.
And real quick on the same topic, you would just mention fawns that are born singly, or whether they're twins or triplets. Have you noticed any difference in from the behavioral side? If it's a fawn that is born with a twin, where basically it would have a playmate, in its early years, have you guys noticed any differences in deer personality, whether if a fawn that's born as a twin or a triplet, that they generally will survive better, or maybe the other side?
No, we haven't. That's a really good question. And again, Mother Nature typically has handled that pretty well with, we just wrapped up a study a few months ago, kind of looking at those characteristics of mom. What condition is mom in, and really kind of looking for that threshold of age and condition of when mom's going to have a singleton or going to have twins or going to have triplets. And there's a lot of overlap. It was really, really messy. And what I mean by that is you can have the same age and body weight of a doe, and for whatever reason, this doe has a singleton and this doe has a set of twins. Now, the general relationship, there's a general pattern that when you're young and below average or below average, you're going to have a singleton, especially your first time breeding. Once you get to be 2 years of age and greater, and you're of average body weight or above average, more than likely you're going to have twins. And then you have those exceptional mothers that are really above average, and most of them are still going to have twins, but some of those will have triplets.
I'm trying to breed these deer around here so they come out with a rack on their heads right out of the gate.
That's going to put mom in a lot of danger to do that.
We'll have to do C-sections, I guess, on my farm. But
we did that at Mississippi State, actually. We're doing a study now where we're doing some cesarean births. So
no kidding.
That is possible. Yeah, but you're not even with a cesarean, you're not going to get a 150 class in the uterus.
Oh man, this is awesome! I can't wait till we can start cloning our 150 classes right out of the womb. I would imagine if a mother has two fawns, the likelihood of survival is greater per fawn, just because statistically, if a coyote attacks a fawn, there's two of them to choose from, so you have a better chance of surviving as opposed to if you were a single fawn.
Yeah, we call that. There's an evolutionary and ecological term for that. It's called hedging your bets. Just like at the casino, it's hedging your bets. And so what a mother, and again we're talking instinct here. They're not cognitively making a decision, but over time, Mother Nature kind of has them programmed that when they have the resources to do so, and it's not just the resources to create the fawn, it's the resources to feed the fawn. So just as many resources are taken by the doe, believe it or not, to build that fawn in her uterus as it takes to feed those fawns for a couple months with lactation. But if a mother can do one or do two versus one, she's hedging her bets. We also see that with, on the average, they're going to have one buck fawn and one doe fawn.
Okay.
And that's a good Mother Nature's way of, this buck, we're going to take our chance at a year and a half of age. This buck is going to disperse and go off the property. His chances of breeding may be really good or really bad. Nobody knows. He's out on his own. The safe bet is to have a doe fawn. She is going to breed. So it's like betting on, evolutionarily, it's when when you're betting on a buck to breed, you're betting that he's going to have disproportionate reproductive success. But the safe bet is to have a doe fawn. You know she's going to breed. So,
okay.
little deep there, I guess, but that's kind of the way we think about it.
Oh, I can't get enough of it. I guess, and tying right back into that question again is, at what time of year does doe health make the biggest difference? I mean, I'm assuming all 4 seasons, but if as a land manager or as a property owner or somebody who has a farm and planting food plots and doing all this, my gather is that you got to have a little bit of everything throughout the year. So, you have your green plots in the summer and early fall. You got to have your grains for the winter time to carry them through. But, especially small plot hunters, who don't have the luxury of having all this different farmland, would there be one tip that you might give a guy to try to increase the health or improve the health of their deer herd or doe herd specifically to try to foster healthier babies, more babies, and hopefully, bigger bucks in the long run?
Summer nutrition. And I'll start with the southeastern context, and we'll move more up to your neck of the woods. But believe it or not, in the South, we have what are called 2 nutritionally stressful periods for deer, whereas in the North, it's typically 1, and that's winter. So you got a really, really severe winter. Our winter isn't severe in terms of temperature, but in terms of food supply, it's very similar. The food is largely absent from the landscape, and a lot of times, other than acorns, the quality of it's pretty low. In the South, though, we have that same nutritional bottleneck in late summer. So rainfall's typically not that big of a problem down here. Sunlight's not a problem. We have a long growing season, but the thing about a long growing season is once those plants mature, the quality of those plants go down. And so when we get in the South to August and September, it is still the growing season. It hadn't got cold yet, but the quality of that food is really, really low. Coincidentally, that is the time when either fawns are hitting the ground or they are relying on their mother's milk. And so that is a very nutritionally demanding time for mom. So if I'm going to help mom, I'm going to have summer nutrition. I'm going to focus on that. And then one of the best ways, as you all know, that you can do that is with summer food plots. So
sure.
You're providing, now you've got those in most of your areas in the Midwest. You've got corn and soybeans, primarily soybeans, that time of year. But you've got that part handled. And simply just think of it, that is when you're starting, when she gets bred in your neck of the woods in October, November, in our neck of the woods, December, January, she's got several months there where pregnancy isn't that big of a demand. The fetus is very, very small. But when you start getting into that second trimester, and then especially into the third trimester in the South, you're talking about summertime. And then when they have had their fawns and now they're lactating, they are at the end of summer, and quality nutrition is typically limited. So if I'm going to help mom, I'm going to have high quality summer foods.
That's awesome information, and that's what I think we get caught up. I'm very fortunate. Jason's fortunate too to hunt some really good areas that most guys just don't have access to. So we always like to try to cover some bases for everybody, not just, the guys who have huge farms and huge leases or whatever, but, everybody from weekend warriors. But that's a great tip. And the cool part about those summer food plots is they're really good to hunt early season, going into the fall as well. So you can kind of get 2 bangs for your buck, so to speak.
Yeah, pun intended. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, hey guys, we're getting close to about wrapping it up. Todd, if you've got one more quick question, otherwise I've got just a couple very, very short one-answer questions that I'd like to throw at Bronson real quick before we let him go.
Mine are never quick ones, so I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you, Jason, and you can ask away, my friend.
Wow. He's not really going to turn it over to me. He's gonna speak at some point. I promise.
He's baiting you in there, Jason.
He is. I
promise
know how
I'll
this
shut up
story ends already. Okay, so we covered a lot of topics, and we definitely got deep into some subjects that are, aren't something that maybe are on the top of mind in terms of awareness, but certainly are things that are part of the equation when it comes to hunting. I'm going to ask you just some really simple, quick questions, and then we'll let you go. Feeding minerals, important, not important?
If you have good habitat, and most people can during the summer, during the antler growing time of year, not important. Most deer get all the minerals that they need from the vegetation that they consume. And if you manage habitat, and by that, by managing for food, meaning I am growing herbaceous plants that deer like to eat, those minerals are found right in the plant, and they're found in a form that deer want to consume them.
That said, does it hurt anything?
No, it does not hurt anything at all. I would not be a credible wildlife biologist if I did not say this. The only time it could ever hurt is like any type of feeding situation. Whenever you congregate deer in a small place and there is any type of disease that can be spread, then you increase the probability that will be spread. Now, putting out minerals does not mean you cause disease. I don't mean that whatsoever. All I mean is when you bring several deer into one point in space and there just so happens to be a disease that could be spread from deer to deer, you're going to increase the probability you spread it. But sure. Other than that, I can't give you any example, where a mineral lick that happened, but just theoretically that would be the only downside.
So it would be fair to say, taking a step back then, that feeding minerals could aid in the development of a deer, whether it's antlers, whether it's body structure, whatever the case. It could certainly help. It's certainly not going to hurt. Yeah,
it can certainly help, but that does not mean that you need to go out and put out minerals. Does that make sense? The only way I could say that indeed it's going to help is if you could prove that minerals are deficient on that landscape, and most of the time they're not.
And the same holds true for people. I was actually, one of my friends is a doctor, and so one day we were talking with him about vitamins, and he said, if most people eat a normal, not even doesn't have to be a healthy meal, you're going to get all your nutritional value from basically one meal a day, and that all these supplemental vitamins and all this stuff, most of it was hogwash. But with that being said, specifically for minerals, just with myself and all the different guys that I know who, if you're not running minerals now or have in the past, generally people run them so that you can put a deer in front of your trail camera and get good pictures. And that's 90% of it.
Yeah, two quick comments is, number one, that is the exact example I use. Hey, if I'm eating the right foods, I've got a balanced diet, I'm getting some protein, I'm eating a whole bunch of vegetables and leafy greens and some fruits, I don't need to take a vitamin. The second thing is, just because I start taking a vitamin, that doesn't, hey, Todd, it's not going to make my hair grow back.
I would try that vitamin, by the way.
I mean, the die has been cast with that, Yep. But a lot of people would think that, well, I can't say. I sense when I talk to people that a lot of people think, hey, we're going to put out these mineral licks. We ought to see a big improvement in antler quality this fall. That's just not going to happen. You're just not going to see it. It'd be the same way of, hey, all three of us, we're going to start right now and take a multivitamin, and we're going to be 10 pounds heavier, and we're going to have 20 more pounds of muscle mass this fall. It's just not good, not going to happen. The other thing you got to keep in mind with mineral licks is, you guys are exactly right. It's a wonderful tool during the spring and summer to put a camera on a mineral lick. But why are the deer going to the mineral lick? For the salt.
Yep.
Remove the salt from the mineral lick, and the number of deer pictures you get will probably go way, way, way down.
And that's what we found. And we talked with a dairy farmer who developed one of the minerals on the market. I'm not going to name any names, but he basically gave us the quick and the quick breakdown is that in the summer months, spring and summer months, when the deer, just like cattle, are eating so much fresh green growth, it literally, all the liquids washes the sodium out of their body. And maybe sodium isn't the right word, but it literally washes them out where they crave that salt or that sodium to be put back into their system. But it's just a product of the environment that they're in at that time, which is tons and tons and tons of fresh green growth. And that's what they've been eating and eating and eating. So it kind of washes the sodium out of their system, which is why they crave it. Is that true?
That you hit the nail on the head. That is exactly right. That time of year, they're consuming so much herbaceous vegetation full of water, and sodium is needed physiologically for them to process that vegetation. So they just naturally, instinctively, that time of year, they crave sodium.
Interesting. Well, hey, that about wraps up our show today. I think we learned a lot of interesting information, and it definitely brought up some topics for another conversation. Bronson, real quick, before we let you go, tell us what you've got going on at MSU.
I am excited, guys. Last time we spoke on the podcast, I told you that we were working on our own podcast here called Deer University, and after much work, Jason, you warned me about that. It was a lot of work, and you're exactly right, it is. But I'm delighted to say that is about to be launched, and that is going to begin May 11th, which, based on the day we're talking here, is the day after tomorrow. And if you go to the iTunes store or go to our website, msudeerlab.com, and look for the link Deer University, we've already got 3 or 4 episodes that'll be loaded up and ready to go, and we're going to come out of the gate talking about buck breeding success, which bucks do the breeding and why, and how that impacts your management plan. We've got 2 episodes on culling, the fallacy of culling for this particular reason or that particular reason, and what it means. We followed that up with a couple episodes on predators and the impacts of coyotes and what you can do in terms of trapping and or habitat management. And we're going to be putting a new episode up once a week. So I would just invite all of your listeners to please tune in and subscribe to Deer University.
All right. And I will put the website, the web address for both of those things into the show notes. With that, I guess we'll wrap it up today. Thanks so much again, Bronson. Todd, any final thoughts?
Oh, just I appreciate this conversation very much, Bronson. The information that you provided is something that I'm already thinking about. My brain's already going on it, but also the way that you put it is a very understandable for anybody. So I'm going to check out your podcast myself, because the biology side of it is something that's always fascinated me, and so it's really neat to be able to hear from yourself and in a way that's down to earth and understandable.
Well, thank you, Todd, and that's what that podcast is all about. It is putting deer biology and deer research in your hands, where you can use it for your management and for hunting. So that was the whole purpose. And guys, thank you very much for the opportunity, and y'all just give me a call anytime you want to talk.
Well, there you have it, another information-filled episode with Bronson Strickland from MSU's Deer Lab. That will absolutely not be the last time you hear from Bronson. He's going to come on the show again, and we're going to talk about trail cameras and how to use those trail cameras for more than just finding out what big bucks are on your property, how you can use those things for some other useful information. With that, I think we'll start to close out the show for the day. We'd like to thank the folks that make this show possible. Ozonics, undetectable, undeniable. Lone Wolf, your silent partner. Spartan Camera, you don't have to be there. Coons Engineering. Wicked Tree Gear. Vortex Optics, the force in optics. Land Pros. And Stick and Pick. Well, that about wraps things up for today's show. We'd like to thank again everyone for listening. For iPod, iPad, or iWhatever listeners, grab your phone or device and go to the iTunes store and search for the White Knuckle Podcast if you haven't already. That'll help you download the free podcast app that's produced by Apple. Subscribe to the show from that app. Every time that I produce a new episode, you'll get it downloaded right to your device. For Android listeners, do the same thing, except download the Stitcher app for free. Then search for the White Knuckle Podcast, and every time we produce a show, it'll show up there. For those of you who don't have a mobile device, you can always watch for us on any of our social media channels. We will always be posting it there. With that, we sincerely hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. That's the way that we get better at what it is that we do. That's about all we've got. Have a great rest of your week.